Today we're diving into something that should send a chill down your spine. Britain's healthcare system teetering on the edge of collapse. A convicted rapist receiving taxpayer money for his emotional distress. Nearly 1 million young people in the UK doing absolutely nothing with their lives. A French general telling mayors to prepare for war and accept the loss of their children. And wait until you hear about the Minnesota welfare scheme that ended up funding terrorists halfway across the world. Stick with me, because what I've saved for the end will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about how our systems actually work. I spent years inside one of the biggest, most respected media organizations you can name. I saw how stories were massaged, how inconvenient facts were buried, how narratives were shaped to fit agendas rather than truth. I walked away from that world because I couldn't be part of the machinery anymore. Now I operate independently, I answer to no one but you, and I tell you what's really happening, not what someone wants you to believe. And speaking of truth, that's exactly why I need your support right now. Like and subscribe if you value this kind of honest reporting. Better yet, consider sponsoring this channel. We spend hours fact-checking every single claim, cross-referencing sources, making sure we're not feeding you fake news or sensationalized garbage. It's exhausting work, but it's necessary work. And if you believe in what we're doing here, your support makes it possible. Also, do yourself a favor and watch until the very end, because trust me, the most jaw-dropping part is waiting for you there. Let's start with Britain, because what's happening in the National Health Service right now isn't just a healthcare crisis. It's a complete transformation of one of the world's most iconic institutions. Official data from 2024 shows that over 20,000 migrant doctors joined the NHS register in just 1 year. Think about that number for a second. That's double the number of local graduates entering the profession. Double. Today, 42% of all NHS doctors are foreign-born, and more than half of new arrivals are here specifically on health and care worker visas. Now, before anyone accuses me of some kind of xenophobic rant, let me be crystal clear. This isn't about where doctors come from. It's about what this reveals. The NHS, the pride of British social democracy, the institution that was supposed to represent the best of what a civilized society could offer its citizens, can no longer function without massive imported labor. The system isn't just strained, it's fundamentally dependent on a global workforce because it cannot produce or retain enough domestic talent. And here's where it gets even more troubling. The government is now planning to tighten immigration rules. Sounds reasonable on the surface, right? Control your borders, manage your workforce planning. Except there's a problem. Analysis suggests this could result in the loss of 50,000 nurses in the coming years. 50,000. That's not a staffing adjustment, that's an amputation. How does a healthcare system that's already on life support survive, losing that many trained professionals? But wait, there's another layer to this chaos. Authorities are uncovering a wave of fraudulent nursing credentials, fake qualifications, people working in positions of medical responsibility who may not have the training they claim. When your system is this desperate, this reliant on filling positions quickly, quality control becomes secondary. And who pays the price? Patients. Ordinary people who trust that the person treating them actually knows what they're doing. This is what happens when institutions collapse slowly, then all at once. For decades, the NHS has been underfunded, mismanaged, stretched beyond capacity. Politicians promised reforms, efficiency improvements, modernization. What they delivered was decline. And now we're at a point where the entire edifice relies on importing workers while simultaneously considering policies that would drive those same workers away. It's institutional suicide in slow motion. Think about the human cost here. We're talking about tens of thousands of lives hanging in the balance, emergency rooms that can't staff enough beds, surgeries delayed for months, people suffering, people facing tragic outcomes, not because medicine lacks the ability to help them, but because the system designed to deliver that help has broken down. And behind all the statistics and policy debates are real families, real suffering, real consequences. Meanwhile, in another corner of Britain, a story emerged that perfectly captures the absurdity of how far we've drifted from common sense. A Turkish man convicted of multiple violent acts against women was awarded compensation from public funds. The reason? He claimed the GPS tracking device he was required to wear, to monitor his movements and protect potential victims, caused him psychological distress. Let that sink in for a moment. The High Court agreed with him. A man who committed serious crimes, who represents a documented danger to society, successfully argued that being monitored for public safety purposes violated his well-being, and British taxpayers are now paying him for his trouble. If you're feeling a sense of complete bewilderment right now, you're not alone. Protests erupted in several cities. Local activists are demanding stricter deportation procedures, a complete overhaul of what they see as a dangerously liberal approach to criminal justice. This isn't just about one case, it's about what this case reveals. Somewhere along the line, the balance between public safety and individual rights became so skewed that protecting citizens from repeat offenders became secondary to protecting the feelings of the offenders themselves. The legal system, designed to serve justice and protect the innocent, has become a theater of the absurd where victims are forgotten and perpetrators are compensated. How did we get here? How does a society reach a point where this makes sense to anyone? It's a question that goes beyond law and touches on something deeper, a kind of moral confusion that's infected institutions across the Western world. When the safety of the many is subordinated to the sensitivities of those who've proven they pose a threat, something fundamental has broken. And speaking of broken systems, let's talk about Britain's youth. Nearly 1 million young people, aged 16 to 24, fall into what's called the NEET category. Not in education, not in employment, not in training, just 948,000 young lives drifting without direction, without purpose, without hope. The number is growing, driven by prolonged economic stagnation, rising poverty, and an epidemic of mental health crises that no one seems equipped to address. The breakdown is revealing. Among young men, the numbers jumped by 15,000 in just one quarter. For young women, the figure actually dropped by 16,000. So we're seeing a specific crisis of young men who are disconnecting from society at an alarming rate. Social services are sounding alarms about a lost generation, young people whose energy and potential are being wasted, whose talents are never developed, whose futures are slipping away while everyone argues about whose fault it is. This isn't just an economic problem, it's a social catastrophe in the making. When you have hundreds of thousands of young people with no stake in society, no connection to its institutions, no belief that the system offers them anything, you're creating the conditions for instability. Apathy, despair, resentment, these are the ingredients of social breakdown. And instead of bold action, instead of programs that actually engage these young people and give them pathways forward, what do we get? Reports, studies, hand-wringing, and more of the same policies that created the problem in the first place. Now let's cross the channel to France, because what happened there this week should terrify anyone paying attention. General Fabien Mandon, Chief of Staff of the French Armed Forces, stood before a Congress of Mayors and told them to prepare for war with Russia. Not a theoretical war, not some distant possibility, but an actual conflict that could arrive within 3 to 4 years. And then he said something even more chilling. He told them to mentally prepare for the loss of their children. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Presidential candidates called the statement suicidal. Critics accused him of fear-mongering, of threatening national unity, of recklessly escalating tensions. But here's the uncomfortable question. What if he's not wrong? What if he's simply saying out loud what defense planners across Europe are thinking in private? The war in Ukraine has shattered decades of assumptions about European security. The idea that major conventional warfare was a thing of the past, consigned to history, has been obliterated. France, like much of Europe, is grappling with the reality that the continent may be sliding toward a conflict that seemed unthinkable just a few years ago, and General Mandon's comments, as controversial as they were, reflect a genuine strategic concern. If war comes, it won't be fought by professional soldiers alone. It will require mobilization on a scale that modern European societies have never contemplated. It will mean sacrifice, loss, grief on a massive scale. But are Europeans ready for that conversation? Are populations that have enjoyed decades of peace, prosperity, and relative comfort prepared to accept that their children might be called to fight? The backlash against Mandon suggests the answer is no, and that disconnect between what military leaders see coming and what the public is willing to accept is itself a crisis. You can't prepare for war if you can't even discuss the possibility without triggering political turmoil. And if you think the absurdity is limited to Britain and France, let me take you to Sweden. A 90-year-old man, a resident of a nursing home, was charged with inciting hatred after making comments about Muslims during lunch. The incident occurred after he'd had a couple of drinks, and his remarks, deemed offensive by staff, led to legal charges. A 90-year-old man, in a nursing home, facing criminal prosecution for words spoken at a dinner table. Now, were his comments appropriate? Probably not. Should nursing home residents be held to standards of civility? Sure, But criminal charges for an elderly man expressing, however crudely, frustrations that millions of Europeans share about immigration and integration, this is where the collision between free speech, demographic change, and new social norms becomes visible in its starkest form. Sweden, like much of Europe, is wrestling with profound questions about identity, migration, and what it means to be Swedish in a rapidly changing society. But when the answer to those questions involves prosecuting non-Asianarians for offensive remarks, you have to wonder if the cure isn't worse than the disease. This isn't about defending bigotry. It's about recognizing that when societies can't have difficult conversations, when expressing certain views, even badly, results in criminal sanction, you're not strengthening democracy, you're suffocating it. The migration question has become the third rail of European politics, the issue that can't be discussed honestly without accusations of hatred flying from all sides. And yet it's the issue that's reshaping European societies more than anything else. When even the elderly aren't exempt from the enforcement of increasingly rigid speech codes, you're watching the death of something essential, the ability to argue, to disagree, to work through differences without the state intervening to punish wrongthink. But if you think what we've covered so far is shocking, wait until you hear what's been happening in Minnesota. This is the story I promised you, the one that reveals just how deep institutional dysfunction runs. Federal investigators uncovered a massive fraud scheme in which millions of dollars meant for social support programs in Minnesota were funneled to Al-Shabaab, a terrorist organization operating in Somalia. Let me say that again. American taxpayer money designated to help vulnerable people was stolen and sent to fund terrorism. The scheme operated through programs designed to support families with autistic children. Sounds noble, right? Help families dealing with the challenges of autism, provide them resources and support. Except many of these families didn't exist. Many of these autistic children were fictional. The fraud was so extensive that by 2025, payouts under the scheme had ballooned to $61 million. $61 million. And the participant numbers swelled into the hundreds, with fake families, fake disabilities, fake everything. In August, federal charges were filed, and the program was immediately shut down. But the damage was done. For years, this scheme operated in plain sight and no one caught it. Or if they did, no one stopped it. Minnesota, a state known for progressive governance and robust social programs, had unwittingly become one of the largest sponsors of international terrorism. The residents, the decent people who pay their taxes expecting it to fund schools and roads and social services, had no idea their money was being shipped to East Africa to fund violent extremism. How does this happen? How does a fraud this extensive, this brazen, operate for years without detection? It speaks to catastrophic failures of oversight, of accountability, of basic competence. These programs are supposed to have safeguards, checks, verification processes. Someone should have noticed that the numbers didn't add up, that families were claiming benefits for children who didn't exist, that the money was disappearing into suspicious channels, but no one did. Or if they did, they were ignored. And now Minnesota sits atop a shameful list, a state that inadvertently funded the very forces America claims to be fighting. The irony is almost too bitter to contemplate. While politicians talk tough about combating terrorism, while security agencies surveil citizens in the name of protection, millions of dollars flowed out of a Midwestern state to a group responsible for tragic outcomes across East Africa. And here's the question that should keep you awake at night. If this happened in Minnesota, where else is it happening? How many other programs, how many other states, how many other schemes are operating right now, funneling money to places and purposes that would horrify taxpayers if they knew? The Minnesota case was only uncovered because investigators got lucky, because someone finally noticed the pattern. How many patterns remain unnoticed? Let me tie this all together for you, because these stories, as different as they seem, are telling us the same thing. We are watching institutions fail in real time. Britain's NHS collapsing under the weight of policies that created dependence without sustainability, a legal system that compensates criminals while ignoring victims, an entire generation of young people slipping through society's fingers, military leaders warning of wars that populations don't want to contemplate, speech codes so rigid that even nursing home residents face prosecution, and social programs so poorly managed that they fund terrorism. These aren't isolated failures. They're symptoms of something deeper. Institutions built over centuries, designed to serve citizens, to protect them, to give them pathways to prosperity and security, are breaking down. The trust that held these systems together is evaporating. People look at the NHS and see dysfunction. They look at the courts and see absurdity. They look at social programs and see fraud. They look at their leaders and see disconnection from reality. And what's the response? More of the same policies that created the problems. More bureaucracy, more committees, more reports, more promises. But no fundamental change, no willingness to admit that the model itself might be broken. We're told to trust the experts, to believe in the system, to accept that everything will work out. But the evidence of our own eyes tells a different story. This is the world we're living in now, a world where healthcare systems can't function without massive importation of labor, where criminals receive compensation for being monitored, where 1 million young people drift without purpose, where generals warn of coming wars, where old men face criminal charges for speech, where taxpayer money funds terrorism. And through it all, the people in charge insist that everything is fine, that the system is working, that we should just keep calm and carry on. But here's the thing. You can only paper over institutional failure for so long before reality breaks through. You can only ignore the warning signs, dismiss the critics, pretend the problems don't exist for so long before the whole edifice comes crashing down. And when it does, when these systems finally fail completely, the consequences won't be theoretical. They'll be real, immediate, and devastating for ordinary people who depended on these institutions to function. So what do we do? How do we navigate a world where the institutions we were taught to trust are demonstrably failing? We start by seeing clearly. We stop pretending that everything is fine. We stop accepting the narratives that don't match reality. We demand accountability, transparency, real reform. We support independent voices who aren't captured by the system, and we prepare ourselves for a period of instability and change, because that's what's coming whether we like it or not. If you found this analysis valuable, if you believe in this kind of honest, unflinching examination of what's really happening, I need you to do something. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and seriously consider sponsoring our work. This kind of journalism, the kind that actually digs into the facts and tells you the truth even when it's uncomfortable, doesn't survive without your support. We're not backed by corporate interests or political parties. We're backed by you. And that's the only way this works. The stories I've shared today aren't just headlines. They're warning signs. Signs that the world we knew, the institutions we relied on, the social contract we thought was solid, are all under immense strain. Britain's healthcare crisis, criminal justice absurdity, youth disconnection, military warnings of war, speech prosecution, terrorism funding, these are all pieces of the same picture. A picture of systems breaking down, of societies under stress, of a world in transition towards something we don't fully understand yet.